My name is Derek Langston. I'm 33 years old, and for the past 8 years, I've been a third-grade teacher at Westfield Elementary in Kansas City, Missouri. Teaching has been my anchor. No matter what chaos life threw at me, the classroom, the kids, the lesson plans, they gave me purpose. But nothing in my years of managing classrooms prepared me for the emotional chess game I was about to find myself in. The moment it began, I didn't even realize it was the opening move. When Madison, my wife of only 5 weeks and 2 days, looked me in the eye and said, "It's my body. You don't get to demand anything from me," I felt like the floor had just shifted beneath my feet. I wasn't demanding anything. I was asking why my wife wouldn't even kiss me goodnight, why she'd chosen to sleep in the guest room since the day we got home from our honeymoon, why the woman I'd loved for over a year had turned into a roommate who barely spoke to me. We had dated for 14 months. We had been intimate before marriage. We'd even lived together for 6 months before we said I do. But from the moment those vows left our lips at St. Catherine's Chapel, something in her changed. She started using that phrase, my body, my choice, as a wall between us. She said it when I asked if we could share the bed again. She said it when I tried to hold her hand during dinner with my parents. She even said it when I suggested a weekend trip to celebrate our first month as husband and wife. I respected boundaries, but I couldn't understand what had changed. Standing in the kitchen one night, making my usual turkey and Swiss sandwich on wheat bread, the same lunch I'd been eating at school since September, a thought began to gnaw at me. Back in March, during one of our premarital counseling sessions with Pastor Williams, Madison had said something that stuck in my mind. Marriage was about security and partnership, not just physical stuff. At the time, I'd taken that as a compliment to our emotional connection. Now I wondered if it had been a warning I failed to hear. The Madison I'd known before marriage would curl up next to me during movies, laugh at my awful puns about fractions, wake up early to drink coffee with me while I graded papers. This Madison barely looked at me, and when she said, "You thought wrong," in response to my hope that things might change, it felt less like a bad phase and more like a plan that had been in place all along. I met Madison 2 years ago at a teachers' conference. She was a social worker for the district, the kind of person who helped us teachers navigate tough family situations. She was reserved, thoughtful, and when she smiled, it felt like you'd earned something rare. Our first date was 3 hours of coffee and conversation, not about work, but about life. She told me about her small-town Illinois childhood, about her parents' divorce, about learning early that people aren't always what they seem. I told her about losing my dad in college, about how teaching had pulled me back from a dark place, about how I'd nearly given up on finding someone who understood that teaching is more than a paycheck. For the first year, things felt perfect. My mom, who had an opinion on every woman I'd ever dated, loved her instantly. Madison came to school events, talked with the other teachers, fit into my life seamlessly. But now, looking back, I saw the red flags. She never wanted to talk about the future in specifics, just vague ideas of building something stable together. When we moved in, she insisted we split every expense exactly down the middle, even though I made more and had offered to cover more. She poured hours into wedding planning, yet dodged conversations about honeymoons or future kids. The biggest warning came during our last counseling session before the wedding. Pastor Williams had asked what we were most looking forward to in marriage. I said building a family and growing old together. Madison said having a stable foundation to build from. When pressed, she mentioned marriage giving her the security to focus on her career. I chalked it up to practicality. I thought she was just cautious about emotional displays. But that night on the couch, watching her scroll through her phone, like I didn't exist, I realized she hadn't been shy, she'd been honest. Madison had married me for stability, not love. The physical intimacy during our relationship, that had been part of the performance to seal the deal. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night in November. I'd cooked dinner. We'd eaten in silence. She retreated to the guest room with a book, leaving me in the living room staring at our wedding photos, photos that were only 6 weeks old but already felt like they belonged to another life. That's when I remembered something. During counseling, Pastor Williams had recorded our sessions with our permission, for his own notes. Madison had agreed and signed the forms. The next day, during lunch at school, I called him. "Pastor, do you still have those recordings?" There was a long pause. Yes, Derek. We keep them for 6 months. But why? I told him what Madison had said the night before, that she'd never intended to have a physical relationship with me after marriage, that she married me for security. His voice lowered. If that's true, those recordings might matter. A lot. And yes, you both consented to them, so they could be used if needed. That night, I confronted her in the kitchen. Madison, what you said in counseling, about marriage being about security, not intimacy, Pastor recorded that. Her face drained of color. You wouldn't. Wouldn't what? Use the truth. She crossed her arms. I gave you what I promised, a wife, a partnership. If you expected more, that's your problem. That was the moment I knew what I had to do. That weekend, I researched annulments. Missouri allows them when one spouse conceals facts that would have stopped the marriage from happening. I filed on grounds of fraud and misrepresentation. When I handed her the papers, she exploded. You're doing this over sex. No. I'm doing this over lies. She spent that weekend on the phone, and by Monday morning, she was suddenly making breakfast and talking about working on things. But I knew what had changed. The legal consequences had gotten real. Her sudden change of tone would have been flattering if I didn't already know the reason for it. On Friday, she had been defiant, arms crossed, daring me to challenge her version of what marriage should be. By Monday, she was offering me scrambled eggs and toast like nothing had happened. But I wasn't buying it. She didn't suddenly miss me. She wasn't suddenly interested in fixing what was broken. She was protecting herself, her image, and whatever financial safety net she believed marriage guaranteed her. I'd already made up my mind, but I wasn't about to tip my hand too early. I let her play the part of the attentive wife, all the while documenting everything. Every sudden, affectionate gesture, every text message that pretended to be warm, every dinner where she asked about my day with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The more she tried to convince me she cared, the more obvious it became she was acting. I kept remembering little moments from before we were married, moments that, in hindsight, should have told me exactly where we were headed, like the night after we got engaged, when we were lying in bed and I brought up the idea of taking a long road trip after the wedding. She had smiled and said, maybe someday, but after we're married, I really want to focus on getting my finances in order. Or the weekend we toured apartments before moving in together, and she pushed hard for the one in the nicest neighborhood even though it would stretch my budget. Back then, I thought she just had high standards. Now I saw it differently. Madison was always looking for what she could gain from each stage of our relationship. She was calculating, even when she smiled. But the recording from our counseling sessions, that was my ice. And I wasn't going to waste it. I met with my attorney that Wednesday. Her name was Clara Evans, sharp as a tack, the kind of person who could slice through someone's story in 5 minutes and find the truth. I laid out everything, the lack of intimacy, the sudden personality shift after the wedding, the recordings from counseling. Clara didn't even blink. Derek, this isn't about a lack of romance. This is fraud, if we can show she entered this marriage with no intention of fulfilling a key aspect of it, and that she concealed that from you. You have grounds for annulment. And the recording, that's gold. I felt both relieved and sick. Relieved because I wasn't crazy, what I was experiencing was real and serious. Sick because the woman I had trusted with my heart had essentially staged our relationship, like a production, just long enough to get what she wanted. Clara told me to keep everything cordial. If she thinks you're softening, she might let something slip. If she thinks you're gone for good, she'll lawyer up fast. That night, I went home and found Madison cooking pasta. She smiled and said, I thought we could watch that new show you like after dinner. It was the most domestic scene we'd had since the wedding. I sat at the table, smiled back, and thought about how strange it was that my own house no longer felt like mine. We ate, we watched the show, we even laughed at the same parts. But I couldn't ignore the way her eyes kept flicking toward me, like she was checking to see if her performance was convincing. Over the next 2 weeks, she stepped up her act. She left me little notes in my lunch bag. She started using the master bedroom again, though she stayed on her side of the bed like there was an invisible barrier between us. She'd brush my arm in the kitchen, but never linger. It was intimacy without substance, a shadow of what a marriage should be. One night, after she went to bed, I sat in the living room with my laptop and started reading everything I could find about annulments in Missouri. Story after story from people who had been deceived into marriage made me realize I wasn't alone. Some had spouses who hid addictions, some had lied about wanting children, and some, like me, had been tricked into thinking intimacy would be part of the deal, only to find out it never would be. I thought about my students, about how I teach them to recognize when something isn't fair, when someone isn't telling them the truth. I tell them to speak up. And here I was, 33 years old, living in a lie I'd been too stunned to challenge right away. That weekend, Clara called. We'll need to submit a sworn statement about what happened. Include the timeline, the counseling session content, the changes after the wedding. And I want to get a copy of that recording as soon as possible. I agreed. But when I called Pastor Williams, he hesitated. Derek, I've been thinking. This recording, it was meant for counseling purposes, not court. I reminded him that we had both signed consent forms allowing him to keep it for 6 months, and that nothing in the agreement restricted its use if both parties had already consented to the recording itself. He sighed. I understand. I'll get you a copy tomorrow. When the email arrived, I played the file alone in my classroom during my planning period. Hearing her voice, calm and certain, saying, physical intimacy isn't something I think is necessary in a marriage. I'm looking for stability, not romance. It was like a punch to the chest. She hadn't stumbled into that answer. She had been crystal clear about her priorities. I saved 3 copies of the file in different places. That night, Madison made a show of rubbing my shoulders while I graded papers at the dining room table. You've been working so hard, she said softly. I had to fight the urge to flinch. 2 weeks earlier, those words would have melted me. Now, they were just part of her defense strategy. I turned and smiled. Thanks, Mads. I appreciate that. Inside, I was thinking, soon, this will all be over. The court date was set for late January. Until then, Clara told me to keep collecting evidence, text messages, financial statements, anything that showed her shift in behavior and her lack of genuine intent. Madison, still thinking she was winning me over, actually made that easier. She sent me messages about looking forward to building a stable life, nothing about love, nothing about partnership in the deeper sense. The word stability popped up so often it could have been her campaign slogan. Christmas came. My family noticed the tension, but Madison was on her best behavior. She helped my mom in the kitchen, laughed at my uncle's corny jokes, even brought thoughtful gifts for my cousins. To anyone watching, she was the perfect new bride. I knew better. On New Year's Eve, she suggested we write down resolutions for the coming year. Hers included improving our finances and establishing routines. Mine included seeking the truth and living authentically. She didn't ask what I meant by that. Maybe she didn't want to know. As January approached, I found myself feeling lighter. Not happy, not yet, but more in control. I had a plan. I had proof. And for the first time in weeks, I had hoped that I could walk away from this without spending years tangled in legal battles. But part of me still wondered how she would react when she realized her performance hadn't worked. Would she fight? Would she smear my name? Or would she just disappear, moving on to her next source of stability? I didn't have to wait long to find out. The morning of the hearing, I woke before my alarm. It was still dark outside, the kind of winter morning where the cold presses against the windows like it's trying to get in. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, thinking about the fact that in a few hours, my marriage could be legally erased. Madison was still asleep beside me, her breathing steady, her hair falling across her face in that way I used to find beautiful. I didn't feel love anymore. I didn't even feel anger. What I felt was a kind of sad clarity, the knowledge that the person I thought I'd married had never truly existed. She stirred as I stood up. Where are you going? She mumbled. Court, I said simply. She blinked, confusion passing over her face before she masked it with a small smile. Right. I'll get ready. At the courthouse, Clara met me on the steps. She looked confident, composed, the kind of person you want on your side when the stakes are high. Madison arrived a few minutes later, dressed in a pale blue coat and heels, carrying a leather folder that made her look like she was attending a job interview instead of defending a marriage. The judge, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes, called us in. We sat at separate tables, Clara beside me, Madison's attorney beside her. Clara opened by laying out the facts. The abrupt withdrawal of intimacy immediately after the wedding, the counseling session recording, the repeated emphasis on stability over partnership, and the documented behavior changes. Madison's lawyer tried to frame it as a simple mismatch of expectations. My client simply believes that marriage is about mutual respect and support, not necessarily physical intimacy. She never intended to deceive Mr. Langston. They simply have different definitions of what a marriage should be. Clara didn't even flinch. She pressed play on the recording. Madison's voice filled the courtroom. Physical intimacy isn't something I think is necessary in a marriage. I'm looking for stability, not romance. The judge leaned forward slightly. Mrs. Langston, when exactly did you share this perspective with your husband? Madison hesitated. I thought it was understood. We talked about wanting a stable future. Did you tell him, before the wedding, that you did not consider intimacy necessary? Madison's silence was answer enough. The judge looked down at her notes, then back up. Fraud can occur when one party enters into a marriage under false pretenses or conceals intentions about fundamental aspects of the relationship. In this case, the evidence is compelling. My heart pounded. The judge continued, I am granting the annulment. This marriage is void as of the date it began, and just like that, it was over. Madison didn't look at me as we left the courtroom. She walked quickly, her heels clicking against the tile, her coat flaring behind her like she was walking into her next role. Outside, the cold air hit my face and I felt something I hadn't felt in months, relief. Clara shook my hand. You did the right thing, Derek. Now go live your life. I drove home in silence, the city rolling by in shades of gray and white. When I got to my apartment, not our anything anymore, I sat on the couch and let the quiet settle around me. I thought about the people who might hear my story. Some would think I'd overreacted, that marriage isn't all about intimacy. Others would understand instantly, because they'd been through something similar. What I wanted was for people to see the deeper truth, that honesty is the foundation of any partnership. Without it, you're building a house on sand. In the weeks that followed, I started rebuilding my life. I took on extra projects at school. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected during the whirlwind of my relationship with Madison. I even booked that road trip I'd once dreamed about, just me, my car, and the open highway. Somewhere in the mountains of Colorado, I pulled over at a scenic overlook, stepped out into the cold, and realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was grateful I'd seen the truth when I did. Grateful I'd had the courage to act. Grateful I hadn't spent years pretending to be happy in a life that wasn't mine. And now, I'm here telling you this because maybe you need to hear it. Maybe you're in a situation that doesn't feel right, but you've been convincing yourself it's fine. Maybe someone you trust has been showing you only the parts of themselves they want you to see. Listen to that quiet voice inside you. It's not paranoia, it's your instincts trying to protect you. Don't ignore it. If there's one thing I learned, it's that walking away from a lie is better than staying in it just to keep the peace. Life's too short to live someone else's script. So I'll end this with the same question I started with. Where are you watching this from? And what's one thing in your life you know you need to change? Drop it in the comments. I read them all, and you never know, your story might be the one that helps someone else find their way out. And if this story made you think, share it. You never know who needs to hear it right now.